This is Randall Reeves, and you're watching the Break It Down show.
Yeah, we've been talking sailing over here, and for those of you guys who know, or maybe you don't know, we've had Jerome Rand, who's over in this window over here. Say hi to Jerome.
How
everybody.
we doing?
Yes, Jerome sailed by himself in a 32-foot boat around the world, and then Randall's like, "That's adorable. Let me show you." Look at you, you're so cute. He sailed in a figure eight that went through all 5 oceans and around 3 continents. It's bananas. So we're going to talk about that. And because I don't know the first thing about sailing, but I love hearing about it, I brought Jerome in to be an expert. And these guys were talking about, like, they're weathermen. I mean, when you guys were talking about like predicting weather and what's coming up and then how to do it, and also the current, and if you're in the current, and oh my God, it's just so many things to think and do about. But Randall, you tried the figure eight once, and then you did it a second time. This is a year of sailing by yourself. First off, why in the hell would you do that? And second, tell us what the hell you did.
You only get one question at a time. I just want to make sure that that was in the contract.
What did you do?
What did I do? Okay.
What did you do, Randall?
To set the stage. And by the way, to correct you just a little bit, if you don't mind, I didn't look at what Jerome was doing as adorable. That was a really, really, really tough row. So come on now, let's play it straight. The figure eight voyage was an attempt to circumnavigate the American and Antarctic continents in 1 year. So imagine I live in San Francisco. I depart from San Francisco. I sail all the way down the Pacific to the bottom of the world, down to Cape Horn, down to the bottom of South America, make a hard left turn, go all the way around Antarctica in what we call the Southern Ocean, return to Cape Horn, make a left turn, sail all the way up the Atlantic into the Arctic, make a left turn over the top of Canada into the Arctic through what's called the Northwest Passage, sail the Northwest Passage over Canada, Alaska, through the Bering Sea, through the Aleutians, Gulf of Alaska, back to home in San Francisco in 1 year. It's about 40,000 nautical miles, which is a long way. If you consider the circumference of the Earth is 21,600, it's almost doubling the circumference of the Earth in 1 year. Kind of a tall order, partly because of length and partly because of where you are. Below Cape Horn, below the capes down there, as Jerome will attest, is difficult, challenging, interesting, everyday, cold as hell sailing. And that bit in the top of the world in the Arctic is also cold as hell and challenging for a different reason. Like almost no wind up there, almost all motoring up there, but the chances of becoming waylaid by ice such that you are stuck for the winter, and by the way, winter's 10 months, the chances of that are very high. So it's a bit of a challenging go.
And even though there's a legal challenge to going through the Northern Passage, right?
Now there is, and this is what Jerome got to find out. What was the last year, I believe, Jerome? Yeah, not prior to COVID. Not prior to COVID.
Okay. And then why would you do this? Why would you spend a year away from your wife? You clearly love your wife. If you watch any of your content, why would you do this?
Oh man, I've been dreaming about blue water sailing since I was a kid. Dad was a merchant mariner skipper. Sea lore was all over the house. We bought our first boat when I was in high school, and I immediately took to the whole single handing thing. I just loved doing everything on the boat: the steering, the sailing, the flushing the head, the cleaning the bills, the whole deal. I liked the everything. And so single handing right away was a passion for me. But all that kind of went quiet in adulthood until about the year 2000. I had a boat similar, though smaller than Jerome's, that I sailed around the Pacific in, and learned in that 2 years of going around the Pacific, about 13,000 sea miles, that, I really did like this solo sailing thing. It was a lot of fun, really satisfying. Came ashore, was very sure I wanted to keep going, told my wife, I'd like to keep going. She said, what's your plan? I didn't have a plan. I just wanted to keep going. So she said, well, when you figure out what the scheme is, just make sure it's a really big one. And after some research, I figured kind of the biggest thing I could think of was to try to sail around the Southern Ocean, which is a classic sailing route from the time of the windjammers, right?
Right.
Add that to a sail over the top of the world, which is a classic sailing route that was only accomplished for the first time in the early 1900s. We tried forever to figure out what that route through the Northwest Passage might be. Somehow to combine those into one route would be pretty big. And I was right. It was a big challenge. As you alluded to, I didn't make it the first time, had to sail home and try again.
But that's because the ocean tries to kill everybody and everything. Like you're so insignificant out there. If you're bobbing around on the ocean, your head is the size of a coconut. That's it. Like that's what you are. And then the sea can be small and be 10-foot waves. Where everybody, if you're in a boat, you're fine. It's crazy how insignificant you are out there. I mean, I remember watching Rand's stuff when he was in the Jerome stuff when he was in the doldrums.
Yeah.
Like.
Yeah.
You don't get to do anything if it doesn't want you to. And it makes you do everything if it hits you broadside with the giant wave.
Yeah. Yeah, you are definitely in a world of constant, uncontrollable variables. The ocean is moving, the wind is moving, the clouds are moving, the boat is moving, the sun is everything around you is moving. And your job is simply to kind of marry with and fit into whatever is moving at that given moment. It can be really challenging. And it's also entirely rewarding to get offshore, to be by yourself, and to realize that all of the problems that will face you today, you can solve them because you've thought most of them through in some way. And they're up to you. How you do it is up to you. I find, I'm sure Jerome feels the same way. I find incredibly rewarding being able to see that wild world kind of on its own terms, and to be able to solve what's thrown at me with the available, very limited resources that I have on the boat. It's a very rewarding place to be.
Well, and if I may, I mean, when you're out there and you're doing it solo, that is when I think you find this connection, not only for the sailor and the boat, but also just with the environment and nature and everything that you just can't find when you have a fully crewed boat or anything like that. It's that one-on-one that is absolutely amazing. And that's what sort of always draws me back out there as well.
Yeah. There's something incredibly rewarding. And I'm sure, Jerome, you've had this experience in the Southern Ocean, way down there, 45, 46, 47 degrees south. The ambient wind in the Southern Ocean, kind of the everyday wind in the Southern Ocean, is 25, 30, 35 knots. That's just kind of what you're used to. The seas are, half as tall as the mast, usually. When the boat is kind of moving along but struggling, sometimes you're in just the worst seas you can imagine, the worst waves you can imagine. And you look out over starboard, and there's this huge bird hovering there. It's called a wandering albatross. It has a 12-foot wingspan. I mean, that's a wingspan as wide as my boat is wide. And there's this, it's just hovering out there. And this wind, you can barely survive on your boat. It's just like canting back and forth and looking at the boat like, what the heck are you doing here? This is where I live. And it's just to see that kind of grace adapted to that kind of an environment. Those birds fly millions of miles in their lifetimes. They only see land once a year when they mate. Other than that, they're at sea all the time. So they make us look like complete novices out there. So it's a great experience.
One of the things that I'm always curious about is when you're out there by yourself, and you can fix things that break. You've got redundant backups and all that kind of thing. But there are times when you're like, I don't know if it's a good idea. I mean, there's got to be those storms where you're like, or whatever those problems are, where you just like, this is dicey and maybe more than I bargained for.
Oh, yeah, that happens a lot.
Questioning your life choices.
As one limited example, on the first try, I was in the Indian Ocean, just past Cape Good Hope, just past the southern tip of South Africa. And I saw this low pressure system developing off of Rio de Janeiro. So like a whole ocean and a half away from me. I picked it up on the weather forecasts. And those long-term weather forecasts were saying that when it came down to me, it would be a monster. And at that point, I was way south. I was down at almost 50 degrees south, which if you're sailing in the Indian Ocean in particular, that's way down there and it's dicey. I had really light winds from the northeast and they drove me south. I said, no big deal. But when I saw this low coming down, I said, I got to get out of here. That low is going to be right on top of me in 5 or 6 days. So I hightailed it north. And when it hit, it was absolutely as nasty as the forecast had said it would be. I had steep, super steep seas coming at me, winds 40, 45, 50. I could not figure out how to sail the boat. The seas were so steep and so close together. I couldn't make the boat safe. We're knocked down, which in sailing world means the boat is picked up and knocked over to at least 90 degrees with the mast in the water. I was knocked down twice overnight, bent the rail in over the winches, broke the solar panels. And then at dawn, I had just jibed around trying to find a safe position for the boat. And the boat was picked up by a sea. Now, my boat weighs almost 20 tons. The boat was picked up by the seas, turned sideways, and thrown off of the wave down into the trough and broke a window, maybe about 2 feet by 1 foot. And I'm sitting opposite. It's like the whole pilot house is just suddenly full of water, full of like white spray water. And I couldn't, that was one of the contingencies I had not planned for. I had not planned for a broken window. The boat I have has been sailed everywhere. It's done Cape Horn. It's done the Northwest Passage. The only newbie really was me, and nobody else had broken a window. So that's one of those moments where you go, what the heck am I doing here? I have to really pause, think. You got a problem you have to solve if you're going to stay alive. What are you going to do? And so, yeah, you do have moments like that for sure. I'm sure Jerome has plenty.
Oh, yeah. Well, it is. It's just one of those situations where out there, especially in the Southern Ocean, you kind of realize that at any moment, the world around you can completely overwhelm you. And, like Randall saying, there are times where you're at a loss for how to be able to maintain safety in those situations. And yeah, I mean, it's like a moment by moment sort of thing in the decisions that you make. But at the same time, yeah, I mean, you just don't have, there's no pause button. There's no like, okay,
right.
Let's just take a time out here. It's incredible, strange feeling to be drawn to. And I think that's one of the questions I've always had is why would I, and I get asked that all the time, is why would you want to even go down there? And I don't think I'll ever have a real good answer for that, but there's just something that draws sailors, I think, to those places like the Southern Ocean. I mean, would you agree with that, Randall?
Yeah, I was reading a book the other day because you've written a book on your experiences. I'm mid throes and writing a book on mine, and I'm at that place where I'm trying to answer the dreaded why.
Yeah,
you get it at every presentation. And as much as I've been wanting to do this so long, it really kind of took me aback in the first several presentations when people said why, because I just presented to you the whole plan, this trip. I mean, doesn't this look like huge fun? It's awesome, right? Wouldn't you like to do this? And they all go, no, I don't know that. That looks terrible. So I had to really backtrack and say, oh, right. Not everybody has this dream. I think one interesting quote I ran across in this book was, it's a strange question. I do it because I enjoy it. I do it because I find it satisfying. I mean, you don't ask someone why he likes to eat chocolate. I mean, that's obvious, right? Chocolate tastes good. It's enjoyable. And I think for sailors like Jerome and like myself, we do this because it gives us pleasure, gives us satisfaction to be in that unadulterated world. That's a poor word, but in a world where between me and nature is nothing but hull. And I'm about as in the world as I define it as I can possibly be, and I find that very deeply satisfying.
Is that danger? Is that part of it? I mean, like I'm fascinated by the Shackleton adventure down south, and then the fact that they could, with no real access to the stars, dead reckon to New Georgia Island, and just you think, okay, first off, it doesn't matter because they're either going to make it or they're not. Like there's no room for error. But they somehow managed, I don't know what it's like 1,300 miles, and they're like bullseye, or not bullseye. I guess they got in the 10 ring, but they hit the other side of the island and they had to do the first traverse north to south that had ever happened. And all these impossible. Is that why you guys do it though? Is there some of that where you want some of that adventure?
Go ahead, Jerome. You start.
I definitely think so. I without trying to sound like, I'm doing it right and everybody else is doing it wrong, I think there's definitely a part of me that wants to lead a very extraordinary life. Go out and see things that other people will only ever read about. There's something in that journey and that experience that also changes me as a person. When you're alone on a boat in an ocean, you can't lie to yourself about anything, any of your emotions, whatever you're feeling, whether it's good, bad, whatever. And there's an amount of truth that I think somebody goes through when they're out there that I find really enlightening. And I don't know, it's just absolutely amazing to me. I sort of got lost there, but yeah, I don't know. Take it, Randall.
What was the question? Is danger is the love of adventure?
Or, do you want to be able to say, there I was, 1,300 miles, no stars in the sky?
Yeah. There's part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's sure. Yeah.
I mean, you want the hard problem, right?
Well, that's different.
Okay. Oh, okay.
A lust for adventure is a lust for excitement. What you just said, which is, I want the hard problem. That's a question of, can I put myself in harm's way? Can I put myself beyond my experience and beyond my expertise and beyond, even to a certain degree, my imagination, and take what comes and survive and live it through? And I think I'm probably closer to Jerome than I like to admit, because I have a reaction against the word adventure, right? I don't think I'm doing this because it's fun. Quite frankly, there are many, many, many days which are not fun at all. But there's this deep sense of kind of going beyond yourself and facing problems that I just couldn't find in suburbia here in Oakland, right? That just our lives in suburbia are as dangerous as lives at sea, but it's different, and we're all in it together. Out there, I'm not in it together with anyone. I'm in it together with the boat, and that's about it. And there's something there that I really enjoy. But I think when I'm, to Jerome's point, when I'm deeply honest with myself, yeah, it's the thrill of having done something. What was that line from Blade Runner? That I've seen things you people could never imagine, or something. That was something like the line from Roy Batty. That there is some element of that in it for sure. The thrill of when I cracked up off of Cape Horn and had to hand steer into Ushuaia for 5 days, which was like, of life and death experiences, that was at the top of my personal list. That was really tough. But when I came into Bahia Cook on the west coast of Chile and started sailing in the Beagle Channel, I realized, man, I'm down here where every other seagoing explorer was. This was how you got from the Atlantic to the Pacific, back before the Panama Canal and back before big steamships. This was how it was done. And so the Beagle Channels, where Fitzroy and Darwin sailed, and north of me is Magellan, and south of me is Drake. And I was in this great museum of explorers, and that was just thrilling. So yeah, I think I definitely have some of Jerome's lust for adventure going on.
Well, it's hallowed ground in those places.
Yeah.
You feel, not only the past adventures, but I know especially at Cape Horn, you get that weight of knowing that how many ships are down below the sea, and you're sailing right over them. It's like, whoa.
Is there time, or is there any room for imposter syndrome when you're down there at the bottom of the Cape and you're like, can I actually do this? You can sail it, right? You can get it done, but that imposter syndrome, does that creep in?
What? I don't know what you mean by that.
Oh, okay. Imposter syndrome is like, even when you're successful, when you're standing on the award stage and you're picking up your Grammy, you're like, they don't know.
Oh, right.
I'm not that good, and it's all bullshit, right?
Yeah.
But you guys know how to sail. You know how to do this. But when you get down there and it's like, okay, look, so I'm a combat guy, right? And a lot of people worry about, like, when it happens, when you get shot at, will I be able to stand up to the test? And then you're out there, and every time you go into combat, you get a familiarity with it. And this has got to be true for you guys. And actually, I want to ask this part question. So remind me, Jerome, later on. Would you rather be becalmed, or would you rather be in the middle of a storm, or trying to surf away from a storm and have that danger? And I would say the combat guy, he's like, look, a regular patrol is a regular patrol, but when there's action, that's where you'd rather be. I'd rather be there than sometimes struggling, doing odd jobs in San Francisco. But that whole thing of well, let's just take that. Let's just go into that part of it. Like, what would you rather have? And then do you have doubt when you're out there doing it, in the middle of it? Like when you are on the edge of survival, am I making the right decision? Am I capable? When all of these incredible people have sunk their ship right there where you're at.
I'll start. I think, and I'm curious to know what you say from a combat experience. What I found for myself is in the moment of having to save the boat and save your life, there's just no time for reflection, right? Imposter syndrome is when you've got the comfort of being able to reflect on what has happened and judge what has happened. And no, when you're in the heat of it, there's just doing. And people say, well, aren't you scared? Well, of course I'm scared. I mean, yes, obviously, but that's a component of the whole situation and not the master, unless actually it does take some effort to get the fear to go down. But I think my relationship to imposter syndrome would be when you get back to land and people say, oh, what you did is incredible. And that's true. But also that you're just a guy, right? I'm a guy. I'm not Einstein. I'm just a guy who had a vision and had a very supportive wife and enough free time to kind of execute on it. And enough free time to screw up the first time rather well and circle back and try again. And what you realize is that a lot of people can do extraordinary things. It's just a matter of kind of being able to peel off and dedicate that part of your brain to it and have somebody like I've had. Joanna's been very supportive of all of this. Somebody who keeps saying to you know what? Yeah, you can do this. You can do this. So. But in the moment, no. There's there's very little recrimination in the height of it.
And then becalmed or a raging sea?
Oh, becalmed is so nice when you don't have anywhere to be. It's like camping on the edge of the prairie. It's just incredible. It's so gorgeous to be just floating on a slightly rolling sea, no wind, take down the sails, let the boat go. At night, turn the anchor light on, just pretend like you're anchored in some coves. That's awesome. Unless you're trying to get somewhere, in which case it's hell. When you have to get to Cape Horn before April, and so it's hell. So I think in my boat, I'm curious to see what Jerome says. In my boat, I'd rather take a good stiff breeze. I'd rather have the gale.
Oh, I'm right there with you, Randall. I think, yeah, if you're in the doldrums or the mid latitudes and you aren't in a big rush to go anywhere and there's no big ominous threat around, yeah, becalmed is one of the most beautiful places you can ever be in the world. I mean, it's an absolutely magical place, especially I found in the doldrums where you have the huge cumulonimbus.
Oh.
The cloud formations and the sunsets and everything are great. But you get down to a place like the Southern Ocean, which I found lots of off-on sailing. As those systems would pass, they would leave me, in 10 to 15 foot swell with no wind at all. So the boat, a west sail, is a horribly rolly boat. I mean, all it takes is about a 2-foot wave for me to start bouncing around. And so you can imagine a 15-foot, wave set and I've got nowhere to go, but I do know there's more systems coming. So for me, that would just drive me absolutely insane. I'd be really frustrated and there's nothing you can do. I've never felt more trapped on my boat as I did when I was becalmed in decent size waved. If I'm in an actual gale, there's, I guess, a little sense of being sort of stuck in it, but you're able to react to things, you're able to do things, and you're actually moving as well. So I think like Randall's saying, it's that whole, if you're trying to get somewhere like Cape Horn before the fall sets in, those calms, they're absolutely maddening. They can just take you to the brink of insanity.
There's an adventure writer named H.W. Tillman, who I think all of us in my line of work, as it were, read with avidity. And he was a mountain climber and a sailor, mountain climber in his first part of his life and a sailor in the latter part of his life. And he was once asked which is more frightening and which is more difficult. And after some thought, he said that he thought sailing and offshore sailing in particular was the more difficult, because as a mountain climber, you can kind of choose to take on the mountain or not, right? You can always walk away. Whereas when
Right.
Jerome and I get offshore, I can't, we're in it. I can maybe reposition myself within a coming storm, but I can't outrun it. I'm going to have to take it. And that storm that I got in the Indian Ocean, it took 6 days to get to me. I was able to move myself in it, and it still clobbered me. And then once I was knocked down in the Indian Ocean, broke a window, it took 48 days from there to get back to safety. So it's really committing exercise from the position of once you're out there, you're out there, and you have to be able to deal with whatever comes at you.
Well, and I would say especially in the Southern Ocean, because, even if the absolute worst happens and you're in a life raft, it could be over a week before anybody could even get to you, because they have to reroute,
Even
ships.
if they know where you are.
Yeah, exactly. On in the Atlantic off the East Coast, you could be sailing to Bermuda. Something goes really wrong, and you could probably get picked up within 24 hours. Plus, the temperature's not so bad. The Southern Ocean just has so many degrees of this could kill you, that could kill you, and that could kill you. And
and I don't know if your experience was this, but I found it really isolating. And much of which I really loved, right? That was kind of what I was after, was solitude. And boy, you really get it. We were talking earlier about sailing right off the coast of highly populated areas, like the east coast of the U.S. You got to get way offshore, because otherwise you're in the shipping lanes, and you'll have many ships a day that will go by you that you'll have to avoid or take into account in some way. I went all the way around the Southern Ocean. It took me 110 days. 15,000 plus miles. During that time, I saw 2 ships, one during the first rounding of Cape Horn, and the next one during the second rounding of Cape Horn. And in the intermediate period, I saw no sign of human life, whatever. No ships, no planes, no satellites, no trash in the ocean, no nothing. You're out there, and that's really great. But it's also like after the knockdown where I lost the window and felt I had to put it to port, you realize, oh wow, it's going to take me a long time just to get into a place where I can fix the boat. So, somebody. I'm sorry. So I wanted to.
Go ahead.
Somebody quipped on the blog at one point. He said there were many times during your passages where your nearest neighbor was on the International Space Station. And I thought, wow, yeah, that's really wild.
Well, and that's sort of the thing I was thinking about. And there definitely had to have been times during your voyage and then during my voyage where we were the most isolated humans on the planet, like bar none, at least, maybe for a day here or a day there, we were further away than anybody else ever would be. And that's kind of cool to think about, that you were very special. 1 in 7 billion,
Okay, so I'm going to ask the next question. Here's another question I get, and this is directed at Jerome. Given the context of what you just said, don't you get lonely?
Yeah, I definitely get a bit lonely, but I don't know. I'm headed out there with the realization and with the want of doing that alone, and I'm in it for that experience. And I think any loneliness that I might feel usually would only come if somebody texted me or somebody was reaching out to me via the Garmin. I could go, if that thing was shut off for a long time, I don't know. I don't get lonely. I find that I just get more and more immersed in the world around me. Yeah. And I always describe it as your brain sort of changes when you're out there, and it starts accepting very low level input. And it gets used to that. When we're here on land, it's computer screens and text messages, phone calls, all this stuff is going on and you're being inundated. But boy, when you get away from all that, it takes a little while, but your brain really can slow down. And then, I don't know, I find that my attention can be kept by looking at the ocean for 4 hours at a stretch. Love it.
Yeah. Oh yeah, for sure. And so to cap on that, I have a couple of answers. One is you're busy a lot and you're underslept a lot. Yeah. So you don't really have time to indulge emotions. You do, but not a lot of the time. And I think people kind of assume that you're on this ocean cruise where I get lots of people, oh, the figure eight, oh, that sounds so lovely, so relaxing. I was like, okay. No, it's not. It's a lot of hard work. And you're cold and you're wet and you're only sleeping, in my case, at 2 hours at a crack at the most. So you're always tired. So you don't really have a lot of time to feel that sense of aloneness. But the other answer, I would say, is very similar to Jerome's, is that to feel lonely, you have to feel alone. And I don't feel alone at sea most of the time. I have company. I have my boat. I have items on the boat that I've, through no will of my own, just kind of named, that I talk to. I have the ocean, the birds that come by in the Southern Ocean. I mean, if you've done an ocean passage in the middle latitudes, you see some birds and you see some ocean life. You get in the Southern Ocean and it is surrounding you. I mean, the prions, which is a dove-sized bird about like this, sometimes they're around the boat in clouds of 50 and 100 birds just going and going, flying, like doing dog zoomies all day long, around and around and around. So and then you've got the big albatrosses and the petrels and the whales and the porpoises. And so if you're out there to be with that kind of experience, you don't really feel lonely a lot of the time. I got lonely for a really hot shower, sure. Lonely for a beer at the brew pub to watch baseball on screen, yeah, sure. But for the most part, no. For the most part, you're out there to see what you're seeing, and that feels good.
When you were vlogging, you would say we all the time. You didn't say I. I noticed that. Is that on purpose?
Sure.
Okay.
Two reasons. One is I is a terrible word to use over and over and over. And I wasn't with Jerome, so I couldn't talk to him, right? But the other reason is that you do. I do. I don't know what Jerome felt, but it feels like a we, right? It's not just
Always.
me. It's me and the boat and the wind and the clouds and the oceans and the animals, and it's a conglomerate exercise. Is the way it feels.
And your virtual stowaways.
Yeah, right. Yeah, Jerome and I attacked it a little bit differently. I wanted to be able to tell the story kind of as it was happening, and that meant engaging in daily correspondence and taking video, actually, and sending video from sea on a weekly basis and photographs every day. And so for me, at least, that added to the business. That was hard work, right? I've got 2 or 3 hours a day just dedicated to trying to kick out a blog post that makes sense. And yeah, so that added to the complexity of it. But for me, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed telling the story kind of as it was happening. But it did mean I was in daily communication with 3 or 4 people, whereas I think, Jerome, you completely cut off for a long period of time.
Well, I one of the conditions of my trip was that I was able to give my mom a daily update at 8 a.m. Michigan time, no questions asked. And then, she would post that out in a Facebook group and all that. So,
very good.
But yeah, I mean, there were a lot of times where, it was just that I'd send off a couple of very PG rated ones, especially in the Southern Ocean, because I couldn't, be like, wow, Mom, I don't know, it's getting out of control. I don't know if I'm going to make it through this one. It was like, no, it's not too bad. It's a little windy. But, it was kind of interesting, though. I think I only made maybe 3 or 4 phone calls with the sat phone when I was out there. And sort of to circle back to the loneliness thing, that was the time that I found I would go into a very lonely depression the minute I hung up the phone. It was like my world came crashing back in on me, because for that 5 minutes that I was chatting with somebody and could hear somebody else's voice, I forgot where I was. And then you hang up and it was like, oh, I'm in the Pacific at 52 degrees south. This is not where I want to be. And so, yeah, that would probably be the only time I was really exceptionally lonely.
That's fascinating, fellas. I love it. I love hearing about it. It's such a neat thing. You talk about being underslept and always having work to do. What is a common, and I know every day is different, every hour is different probably, but what's a common workload you go through in a day?
It's not going to sound like as much as you might imagine, but as we talk about the things we have to do on board, remember that we're oftentimes holding on with at least 3 of our 4 appendages. Almost everything you do, you're doing with one hand. I remember learning this in the Pacific on my little boat. I remember I had a cutting block on the countertop and was at sea and the boat's rolling and I'm cutting the onion and I put this pot on the stove and the onion falls on the floor. I lean over to pick up the onion and the cutting board falls on the floor. And it's just like your whole world is moving constantly and you're staying on board. People ask me, what are the keys to successful cruising? Number 1 is staying on board. Number 2 is staying afloat. And number 3 is just keep going. If you just keep going, it doesn't even matter which way you go. You'll run into land eventually. But that whole getting used to the moving platform is really challenging. I think for me, I kept a kind of a land-based daily cycle. I'm curious what Jerome did. So I slept during what were, for me, normal hours. I'd probably start sleeping at about 9 or 10 o'clock. I sleep at sea, unless I'm close to the coast. I sleep in 90-minute cycles at sea. Get up, look around, check the horizon, check the AIS, which is the device that tells me if there's any shipping close by. Make sure the boat's sailing in the right direction and is not overworked. And if all of that can take 30 seconds, and I could be back in my bunk immediately. Or if things aren't right, I could be getting up and putting on foul weather gear and hitting the deck, and I might be on deck for several hours. It just depends on the conditions. So the deal I have with myself is never sleep more than 90 minutes, but sleep as many of those as I want and as I can fit in. Now, the truth is, in the Southern Ocean, it's so active and the weather systems are so dynamic. Wind velocities, wave heights are changing so quickly that you very rarely get a good night's 90-minute chunk worth of sleep. And so napping in the Southern Ocean, I found, was the only way to survive. And I got to where I was so tired, I just sit down and fall asleep. That's what you do. So you get up in the morning, have a cup of coffee, and make a log entry, check out the boat out, make sure everything's going along fine. Make breakfast, sail the boat. Where are you? Pull a weather file, plan your day's route and your week's route based on the weather you see coming in at you. Make lunch, change sails. You may not touch the sails all day long, and you may change sails once every 20 minutes all day long. It really depends. And then on a long haul boat like Jerome's, like mine, after the first few months, stuff just starts breaking. You're in a really, really, really high stress environment in the Southern Ocean in particular, where the waves are generally very large. And to Jerome's earlier point, where he talked about the doldrums, it's oftentimes the lighter wind days where the most damage is done, because stuff can crash and bang around. So you oftentimes have a to-do list of things that are broken that need to be fixed, and then another to-do list of things that need to be looked after so they don't break. So you're always constantly working those two lists against each other, and just keeping hydrated, keeping fed, keeping the boat going, and keeping the boat repaired. That's your day every day.
Yeah, maintain, repair, replace constantly.
Yeah, and those daily checks are probably the most important. Just being able to have your eyes and your hands on every screw, every bolt, every pin, anything that's going to work its way loose. Because I always found that it's much like the whole avalanche thing, where it can just be one teeny little problem. Then on a boat, though, it can turn into a massive snowball. And then you're like, oh, no, that could have been so easy to fix. There's been a lot of times where you find that one little cotter pin that's sort of half removed itself. And you're thinking to yourself, wow, if I didn't see that right now, that would have been a huge problem. So, those daily checks are absolutely crucial.
Totally. It's the compound failure that you're trying to avoid at all cost, right? The pin pulls out of the wind vane, and so the wind vane slams up against itself, and suddenly the whole wind vane is out of commission. It's like, oh, that was just a pin. Like, if I just replaced that pin, that kind of stuff. Yeah, it's a really good point. But what I found for myself is in the Southern Ocean, in particular, anything soft that was moving wore out really quickly. So all the sheets, which are the ropes going from the back of the boat up to the sail, all the halyards, which are the lines going from the boat up to the top of the mast that hold the sail up, all of those were I was like, burning through them in a week or 2 weeks, whereas in other parts of the ocean, they were lasting for the whole passage. And so staying on soft things and other things too, like your hands. I don't know, I have pictures of my hands where all of the calluses, which become huge over time, where my hands have been so wet for so long, all the calluses and the top layers of skin from my hands were sloughing off. So they were really sore because I was having to do all this work with my hands, but I'd lost the first couple of layers. So anything soft really takes a beating out there.
My buddies and I have a race car. It's a piece of crap. That's part of the point of it. And, like it's going to break because when you push something that hard for that long, something breaks. And it's always a 3-cent part that we tried to get for 3 cents instead of just spending 50 cents to get the good one, And we went to Daytona. We drove our stupid car all the way across the stupid nation in a stupid trailer. And it's so many problems. It's very much like, say, when you guys describe it, I keep thinking about these trips. And we get there, we're at Daytona. We've got this big, fast car. We can go by, we're just zooming along. But the car that won was a Saab, like 900, and it just went around the track. It didn't go super fast. It just went all day long. It never broke. It never needed gas. It just did this all day long,
Yeah.
And what broke for us was a stupid, it's not even a gasket, like an O-ring gave out, and that knocked us out of the race for like 3 hours. It made us completely non-competitive. We got the car fixed, went around passing 100 cars, but we're just so far behind. And you're right, that constant maintenance, the understanding that pin that goes through and there's metal and it's banging, it's making the hole longer and wider. And you're like, now how am I going to fix this? Do you have to weld, or what do you do to fix some of these fabrication problems?
I don't know how to weld, number one, and I can't weld. My boat is aluminum. And not really something one can weld up at sea in any case.
Right.
I did a lot of, well, here's just one example. I have a wind vane, which is a mechanical steering device on the boat made by a company called Monitor. Beautiful device, all stainless steel, uses wind direction to move a paddle in the water, and that paddle in the water moves the tiller back and forth. So I can steer my boat on a particular course relative to the wind is all day, every day. And that entire device is made out of metal, except for 2 plastic parts.
Yes.
2 bushings that hold the pin, that hold the paddle in the water.
Yeah.
And I steer by that thing 24 hours a day. And it's funny. I think it was wearing, those bushings were wearing out. Yeah. Not the metal part, the bushings that were keeping the metal from rubbing against each other. And I went back to the manual. And the manual said, we recommend you replace these bushings every 15,000 miles.
Yeah.
Well, I'm trying to do 3 times that in 1 year. And it really, if you're really going to take that thing apart and replace those bushings, you really ought to be on a dock somewhere. And so that was one of the biggest problems, actually. Not an emergency problem, but one of the biggest kind of that was a crucial device for my cruise. I could not be without it. Figuring out how to repair that underway without taking it apart and then losing all of the other 1,001 pieces over the side was a big conundrum.
And when you think about those things, and I'll shut up in a second because I want to hear you guys talk, but like on our race car, we put a lot of power into it, and then the A-arms that hold the front tire. So I'm looking at the bottom of the car, right? They started rotating like this because we have bigger tires, more power, and this car just wasn't designed to do that. So we had bushings, and we had to put metal bushings in there so that they wouldn't, so we just had to overbuild it. But I'm sure the engineer at Toyota is like, why would you guys even push the car to that? Like, it was never designed to do that. Are these boats designed specifically to do what you're doing, or are you guys pushing them beyond their limits and having to modify things as you go?
Yes and yes.
Okay.
They are designed for this, and you're also pushing. I'm sure Jerome will say the same. It is almost impossible to relay to someone who has not been there the difficulty of keeping a boat going in that Southern Ocean environment month over month over month. It's just constant movement, constant strain back and forth, 24 hours a day. And it's not little bits of strain, it's big strain all the time. And it's just really hard. So my boat was built in 1989 in Germany out of a very strong material called aluminum for a guy who wanted to be the first person to sail around the Americas, Germany, through the Arctic, down around Cape Horn, back to Germany. And he had the boat built by a yard in Germany called Dubel and Jesse. All they made were really fine painted teak decks, beautiful furnishings below, all real fine aluminum sailboats. And he said, look, I want to do this really difficult thing. I need you guys to make me a tractor, something super strong and super simple.
Yeah.
And so that's what I got. You know, it's like 43 feet long, full keel, aft hung rudder, tiller. I mean, the thing that steers my boat has no moving parts except the thing that moves, right? It has no quadrant, no cables, no complex stuff. You know, big tankage, so I didn't have to have a water maker. I could drink my own water. Crash bulkhead, so that if I got a hole in one part of the boat, I could hopefully stay afloat. I mean, it's built for this from start to finish, and it still gets into trouble, and it still wears out because it's such an amazingly big place. I re-rigged, meaning I replaced all the wire that holds the mast up in San Francisco before I set up the first time. And the guys in the boatyard there, they looked at the size of wire holding up the mast, and they said, "Nah, I'm sorry, we can't put this size wire on your little boat. We put this size wire on 150-foot boats. I mean, you're crazy." And I had to explain, look, the previous guy who owned this boat took it to the Southern Ocean, rolled the boat, did a full 360 below Cape Horn, took the mast out, and he had the rig designed so that the boat could roll and not lose its mast. So please put this big honking wire back in the boat. I mean, so that, and so built as strong as it is, still gets into the problems. And the West Sail, I mean, the West Sail is in that class of boat too.
Oh yeah, as overbuilt as they come. I mean, I think the kind of cool part about the West Sail is that they were, you know, a production boat. I mean, they cranked out over 1,000 of them, and the vast majority are actually still out there plying the oceans today. You know, they've turned into sort of a cult classic sort of boat because they have a lot of downside as far as sea kindliness, you know, being comfortable in chop and sailing to weather and stuff. But what they lose in that, they make up for in the fact that, you know, the sailboat that made it through the perfect storm was a West Sail 32, and it didn't even have anybody on it. You know, it's a real, it really is a testament to just how strong these and how overbuilt they are. I mean, you know, just like Randall's saying, when people walk up to this boat, they see the wires, and my mast is only about 42 feet. And they're huge. They're what you would see on a 60-foot or even bigger boat. And it's incredible. But you need that because where we're sailing, you're really expecting, you got to know that, okay, the chances of getting rolled over, and I need every bit of strength I can on that mast, because if I lose that, then I'm in real trouble. So, yeah.
There's a concept in naval architecture called reserve buoyancy, which is basically, for lubbers like myself, it's just like, how high are the top sides? How hard would it be for a wave to push the boat under if no water went inside the boat? And what you're looking for on a long distance voyaging boat is reserve toughness. You know, how much can you beat it up? How much can you break it and still have it survive? So, you know, what I was going for and what Jerome were going for, we're going for really, really simple designs, not a lot of moving parts. Not a lot of stuff to break. The simpler you can make it, the fewer systems you can have, the less stuff to break, the less your vulnerability, and the less time you spend repairing. I mean, you already spend so much time just keeping the boat together. The more you can reduce that, the better your quality of life, as it were, at sea. And even at that, you still find the sea is huge. I mean, you've got waves coming at you the size of 3-story buildings. The challenge I had in the Indian Ocean was where I got thrown down was, I had waves coming at me the size of 3-story buildings, and they were like surf break. It was all closing out, like for a couple hundred feet in each direction. It was just white water, and it was just, you look at that and you go, there's nothing designed to actually sail through that. You're in it, and in that particular gale, it was just a matter of time.
So you guys get it built, you super reinforce it, and then you go out and try to break that son of a bitch in a storm. Like, let's go find some.
No, you got to baby it through the storms. But at the same time, you know, in the Southern Ocean, you really got to use that forward momentum to get those miles. So when the wind's blowing really hard, you want to use it. And I wanted to ask you, Randall, what's your top speed surfing waves on the boat?
Cross my heart and hope to die, I didn't surf all that much. So surfing, just to kind of bring people up to speed, surfing on a boat is exactly what you think it is, right? The boat it picks itself up and starts planing just touching the water in that latter part of the hull, just like a surfboard. Jerome and I sail what are called heavy displacement boats. They're not designed to surf. They're not designed to go any faster than their own bow wave. In my case, my design speed for the boat, what we call maximum hull speed, is about 8 knots. Probably it's about 6.5, 7 for Jerome, simply because the hull is a little bit smaller.
5.5.
Is that right? Okay.
Yeah.
But there are seas. So again, my boat's 43 feet long. There are seas plenty big enough in the Southern Ocean where this 20-ton boat goes up the side of the wave, and the wave is steep enough that the boat starts surfing down. So instead of my doing 8 knots, I'm now doing 16 knots down a sea. And I'm in the pilot house. I have a pilot house so I can actually see from undercover. I can see the boat. I'm in the pilot house, and there's this wave. I'm throwing a wave like 5 feet tall, casting it on either side of me as I sail down. There's this roar to the boat and a vibration to the boat that is not usual and somewhat disconcerting.
Yeah.
So I did that only a few times, and I never actually, to tell the truth, it felt like the boat was under control. One of the things we worry about is that the boat will surf down the wave and keep going, nose into the bottom of the wave, and then pitch pole, tip over itself. And I never got the impression that the wave was so steep that I didn't really worry about that. I was worried about going 16 knots. I mean, that was really thrilling in a not so great way. But yeah, I maybe surfed that I know of. Surfed maybe 3 or 4 times. How about yourself?
Oh, I don't know why, but Sparrow just loves getting in good, 18, 20 foot waves, and she can hold her line. Rarely ever does she deviate from it. And this would be with just a teeny bit of mainsail up, or in the worst case scenarios, it was with just a tiny storm jib sheeted amidship. So it's not actually trying to catch any wind. But I think my top speed was about 20.9 knots down a tremendous wave.
Blistering.
And yeah, I mean, but at the same time, I was in that situation where I was like, I want to just keep going because I want to get out of the Southern Ocean. And I definitely remember seeing the huge amount of spray coming off the bow and thinking like, wow, I feel like I'm a Volvo 60, ripping through the Southern Ocean right now.
We're often asked, at least I am, by sailors, how come you don't heave to or throw out a drogue? And so certain storm tactics, ways of surviving storms are to not keep going, but to actually heave to, put the boat in a resting position relative to the sea, or to throw out this big parachute type device that stops, kind of anchors the boat in the waves. And I only used mine maybe in the 2 full circuits. I think I deployed it 3 times total. And one of the reasons is not that you're some brave ass guy and you just think you can fly through anything, but because you have so many miles to go and you have so many more gales to weather, you can't afford to just stop every time the sea gets out of hand. You have to figure out how to weather it, how to make it go, because you've got another 10,000 miles to go before you can turn left and go up into better weather.
Yeah.
When you guys hear about, go ahead, Joe.
No, please. Well, I was just going to say, yeah,
you go.
Oh man. Well, I was going to ask, what did you have? Did you have any sort of emergency plan for falling overboard? People are fascinated with solo sailors falling overboard, and I'm just wondering if you had. I know some people stream a line, some people are clipped in, all these other things. What was sort of your strategy if you were to fall overboard?
No, that was not the thought process. The thought process was not falling overboard. Is what is paramount. I dragged the line for a while. And I realized after the first 10,000 miles that the reason I was breaking the breakaway tube on the wind vane, which is a kind of a on the water paddle part of the wind vane, it's a thin tube that's designed to break if the paddle hits anything in the water, so you don't actually damage the whole unit. You just break it's like a fuse. So I was breaking one of those every few thousand miles. I couldn't figure what was going on. And what I finally realized was this line I was dragging in the water was fouling on the paddle. And so I took it in. I'd stopped doing that. The previous owner of the boat, who had a couple of full circumnavigations in Moli, he attached a line to the bow and a line to the starboard quarter and port quarter, and let it kind of hang over the topsides a little bit, so that if he fell in the water, he could grab that. Topsides on mower, they're like 4 feet, so there's no way if I'm in the water, I'm not grabbing the topsides, the gunnel. It's just too high. Right. So that was his strategy. My strategy, I didn't do that. I clipped in. I actually ran a line from the center of the cockpit to the base of the mast, and I clipped into that. Almost all of my trips forward are to the main mast to reef the mainsail. And my reasoning was I have these lines running down each side of the boat, jack lines that I can clip into, but the tether I'm wearing is 6 feet long. And if I get swept, I'm going in the water, and I'm going to be dragged by this boat that's going 4, 5, 6, 8 knots, whatever it is. And if I'm in the water being dragged, it's going to be almost impossible to get out. It's just, I'll be attached to the boat. Great. But I won't be able to pull myself back up. There's just too much water pressure. So I clipped into a center run line, so that if I was swept over the side, I would just barely go over the side. I'd still be kind of tangled in the lifeline. And that's what I used when I was going forward. One of the challenges, I think, on a super long cruise, and I'm curious to see what you say, Jerome, is that you get very comfortable. You realize that it's hard to fall overboard. You get very tuned into what's going on the boat and how the boat's moving. And so there were times you don't always have time to clip in. It's time consuming, and then you have this thing to deal with that's attaching to your umbilical cord. So there are times when you've got to do something now and just run up forward and take care of it, and make sure, as my dad would say, one hand for you, one hand for the ship. But I clipped in a lot, and I use that center line more than the one going forward to the bow.
Gotcha. Yeah, because I remember when I was trying to prep and get ready for my trip, my sort of focus initially, because I know Matt Rutherford, he used to drag a line when he first started his around the Americas. And I figured, there's no way I'm going to be able to pull myself back up just using this line, especially if it's been in the water for 6 months and it's probably just going to snap. Right. But I did attempt to try and figure out a way to almost have like a tripping line that would be attached to the wind vane. So that if you could just get to that to put some pressure on it, it would make it so that the wind vane is disabled, and therefore the boat would eventually round up. But I don't know. I never was able to figure out a system that wouldn't, like you said, get tangled up and create, more problems with the wind vane. So I was just curious about that.
Yeah, it's to your point. It's also a common question that I get in presentations, and it's just like, it's one of those things that once you get to sea, you figure out the system you're going to use, you get in the groove of it, you don't really think about it anymore. I don't look over the side and go, God, I have to remember not to fall over today. You don't think that. So
that sounds very much
I get in trouble. I get in trouble during my presentations because they see the videos and I'm never clipped in, and they're sort of like, what's the deal with that? You got to explain that. I don't think I've ever done a Q&A without having to go through that whole thing, but we won't go into that today.
Right. This is a taboo conversation in my family, because during my first cruise in Mur, which was a 30-foot sailboat, I actually fell overboard and I wasn't clipped in. I was coming north from Hawaii back to British Columbia in 2012, and this was a year after that big tsunami in Japan had pulled off, what was it, like 1.5 trillion tons of stuff into the water. So there's these huge debris fields north of Hawaii that was heading east, and I was sailing through it, and I was collecting stuff for the University of Hawaii just to show them what was out there. And I remember finding this one artifact. It was the only actually truly clearly Japanese artifact that I had found. It was a rice bag with kanji Japanese language on it. I really wanted it almost no wind, right? I'm just like going 2 knots, tack around, reach over the side and miss, tack around, reach over the side, miss, tack around, reach way over the side, and the sea just kind of goes boink, and I flop into the ocean. It's like, whoa, boy, talk about waking up fast. That was a smaller boat and had a lower freeboard, so I could actually keep up with the boat swimming for a brief time, and I just reached it forward. And I remember when I told my wife that, she said that I almost walked across the water to your position to slap you in the face and tell you to be clipped in. So I'm always clipped in.
Good man.
But I mean, when you do stuff like that, where your life is on the line, you do learn an elegance to your movement. You know, you have to go get, things done in a certain amount of time. And combat is the same way, where, what do you mean you don't wear a helmet? Like, well, I've got a helmet with me, but there's reasons why I don't wear a helmet. There's a madness to my method, but there's also a method to my madness.
Yeah.
And I totally get what you guys are saying. You mitigate risk. And for folks who don't ever have to mitigate risk like that, like when the whole pandemic thing broke out, I've been hit by a tank, right? So it's hard for me to be terribly terrified of a lot of things, because a tank hits you and you don't normally survive, so we get a different perspective on things. I wanted to ask you guys, I think about people like Chris Burditch, who like stand up paddleboarded from here to forever. Guys like Richard Halliburton, who ultimately died on an adventure. I don't know if you guys know who Richard is, but he swam across the Panama Canal, and he was like an early 20th century adventurer, did all kinds of crazy things. Or that guy that swam around the UK and had like a jellyfish attached to his face as he's doing it. And like, yeah, to your guys' point, like he had to swim every day. And it's like, no, I have to swim for 8.5 hours today because I can't lose any more. Like the ocean decides where he goes because he can only swim, right? And so he had to be on a pace. He had to go out, even if he didn't feel well, and go out and do that. So who do you guys is just crazy? Like the guys that do this, forget it, they're bananas.
What was the question? I missed the question.
Well, just in general, like adventurers, when you hear about people doing things that are insane, like swimming around the UK and all those kind of impossibly hard things, who do you guys look at and go, wow, why?
Yeah, Alex Honnold, the guy who free soloed the El Capitan. Done. No way.
Have you seen that movie Don Wall?
Oh yeah, I've seen Don Wall. Those guys are crazy too. That's a whole different thing. And honestly, I think that sort of free soloing, no lines, climbing a mountain like a huge face like that, I think that's pretty close to ocean offshore sailing, because there is no pause button for those guys either. Right. It's not like they could be like somebody lower down the line. They're in it, and if things start getting iffy, they've got to deal with it. But boy, that makes my palms sweat just thinking about some of the video of those guys doing that.
That's fascinating. I hadn't thought of that, and I completely concur. I look at that and I think to myself, that's nuts, and it's just absolutely nuts to free solo something like that. To your point, where you've got to go up or down, you can't just hang. You are in it, and if you get a storm coming through El Cap, you're toast, right? That's funny, and I think it's really interesting to me because people look at us like that. You're crazy to go do that kind of sailing, and it doesn't look. I don't know if it looks crazy to Jerome, but the stuff that we've done doesn't look crazy to me. Because why? Why is that? Because we've thought about it a ton. We've prepared. We've practiced. We've done other cruises. We get at least most of the requirements. We've planned it out. I've got 15, 16 different spreadsheets just trying to work out the mileage for the figure eight. And so for me, it doesn't look crazy because I've figured out how to do it and that it can be done by a human. I don't know if I can do it, but I know that it can be done. And so in that way, I've kind of mitigated the risk. Whereas I look at the wall climber and go, I have a clue, right? I have no idea about technique or any background. It just looks absolutely bonkers.
Yeah. Well, I don't want to take any more of you guys' time, but it's such a great conversation. It's so neat to share this with you guys. I mean, I want to ask what's next for the both of you and all that kind of thing, but that'll take us another 20 minutes. I want to just first off, thank you guys for doing this, and thank you for living these lives and showing us, what's out there. I just read Sebastian Younger, and he's going to be on the show in 2 weeks. But I just read his new book, Freedom, and basically him and his buddies went out and they walked along a river at a railroad line. Same kind of thing. They went out on an adventure by themselves, no help, no nothing else, and just went walking. And it sticks to us as humans to want to go do these things that are hard, that are isolated and dangerous. And believe it or not, on this trip that Sebastian and his buddies did, people shot at them.
Oh,
just because they were walking down the road. Wow. Like, let's shoot at these guys. Yeah, crazy things like that happen. Wow. So it's fascinating to hear you guys talk about all this stuff. I'd love to have you guys come back and do some more of it. Just briefly, what are each of you working on next in terms of like any kind of big adventures? Randall, would you go first?
Sure. COVID's kind of taken the wind out of our sails, I think, as sailors, because most countries are closed. We just can't go there. So I've been working on a project where the weird thing about the figure eight voyage is that you don't go anywhere quickly, but you go too fast, and I didn't get to stop. So there are a lot of places that I really didn't get to see. Like I went through the Northwest Passage, but I did it in 48 days. I got to see hardly anything. One of the things that would fascinate me going forward is freezing in for winter in the high north, but it won't be this winter. Countries, even with vaccines, countries aren't open. So that, and the other thing I'd really like to do is be able to go around the Southern Ocean more slowly. There are lots and lots of islands, remote, uninhabited, bird sanctuary islands that would just be incredible to be able to explore. So those are two things I'm working on, other than a book. And the book is really what I'm working on right now. I have a picture book, the Figure Eight Voyage, available on my website, but I'm working on a narrative now as well.
And there's a link for that right there in the bottom of the show for those of you guys watching. Jerome, what about you? What's next?
Well, within the next probably week, I'm sailing from South Carolina up to Maine, which will be a mini adventure in itself. And that'll take probably about 12 days, 2 weeks. And then future endeavors, I think it's actually that this upcoming sail is going to make or break my solo sailing career, because my last trip was such a blow as far as to what it was like to be out there, to really feel like I couldn't stop anywhere, I couldn't go anywhere, and there were hurricanes there. It was a really bad trip. But there's a little glimmer of hope. I have a very, very distant relative who was in the phosphates trade back in the 1800s, and he was marooned on, we believe it was Howland Island in the Pacific for 9 months. And I've always thought about recreating his trip from Portsmouth, New Hampshire, all the way down around the Horn backwards up to the island, and then sail back down. And so double Cape Horn, but not have to go around the world, so to speak. It would be a pretty sizable trip for sure. But like I said, I've got to make sure that I'm doing it for the right reasons and because I really want the journey and the adventure. If you're not in a trip 100% like that, there's just no way you're going to be successful. So that's we'll have to just see, but time will tell. Because if I do, I'd be leaving for that sometime in like October, probably.
All right. Well, if you get it together, let's have you come on the show and brief us, and then we'll do. Any last comments or questions at all?
No, just thank you for the opportunity. It's fun to talk about the experience and what made it unique.
Yeah. Okay, stand by.
Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching the Break It Down Show.